Welcome to the Been There, Sold That podcast, where you can take away sales and business tips to grow your business efficiently, effectively, and profitably. Take it away, Brianna Hendley and Phil Whitebloom.
Well, hello, Phil. How are you today?
I am doing good. You know, as I look around the room, it's just not the two of us here.
It's not today.
No, we have a special guest. I'll let you introduce Andrew.
Awesome. So we have Andrew Oxley, who actually was introduced to me by someone else that said, "Hey, I have a great guy that would be fantastic on your podcast. Would he be somebody that you would be interested in?" And I went down the rabbit hole doing a little stalking and research, as they say, and found out that Andrew is not only a fantastic leadership coach, executive coach. He's owned numerous businesses. He has a degree in engineering, and he runs a program called Leader Shift, which is focused on helping executives of large companies, as well as working with metronomics. And you can correct me if I'm wrong, Andrew, working with the strategic growth pieces with the CEO and other leaders within the company. Yes. So he's got some really exciting stuff that he wants to talk to us about today. And if you guys get a chance to go to the Leader Shift website, there's a 3-day, 7-minute leadership informational program that you can take a look at. And it's just got so much information packed in 21 minutes of just quickly going through his video and what he has. So Andrew, thank you so much for joining us today. We're so happy to have you.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. So talk to us a little bit about how you got into doing what you're doing.
Yeah, I always tell people I'm uniquely qualified to be a leadership coach, which is a nice way of saying I have no qualification whatsoever. I actually... Well, the good news is everything we teach our clients, and we've been doing this for over 30 years now, we first tried with our own companies, and then we also work with many clients. So we don't just roll stuff out and hope it works. But I actually got a degree in engineering many years ago. I like to say I was in the 25% of the class that made the top 75% possible. And so I was taking a business class in fourth year, and one of my professors, his name was Professor Jack Lemon, and he invited me to stay after class, which was never a good thing for me. Getting an invitation from the professor to stay after class. And he said, "Mr. Oxley, I've been reviewing your transcript." And I remember thinking, oh no, here it comes. And he said, "You're not exactly at the top of your engineering class." And I said, "I am aware of that." And he said, "You are, however, at the top of this class." And I said, "I didn't know that." And he said, "It occurs to me you should not be an engineer after you graduate." And I was like, "Well, I'm sort of in my fourth year, maybe that would have been better information a few years back." And he said, "Go sell something technical." And I didn't even know that was a thing at the time. I didn't know that there was technical sales. And so I got a job with Train Canada, selling commercial air conditioning in Toronto. And Toronto was going through a bit of a building boom at the time. And that enabled me to have what I affectionately refer to as my midlife crisis at a very early age, because I'd done well financially, but I didn't feel like my life was on the right track. So decided to reinvent myself, moved to the US, and started a leadership training company, and decided to do it differently because I'm not a big fan of traditional training. And so we've had some great clients and had some great success. But I think what makes us different is we always connect first to the business results that the business is trying to achieve. And we use leadership development as a tool to help the business get there, not the other way around. We don't presume that if people become better leaders, that business results will improve. They might not. So we always start with the business results first. We think it's a false choice that you can be, you have to either focus on results or focus on people. And I'm preaching to the choir with the two of you. Obviously, it's a both answer, not an either or answer.
Right. It's great. So I love it. And like Brianna said, you have right there on your website, you have that those mini courses, if you will, or micro courses.
Yep.
And it was a great way for to learn more about you and your company, because this is the first time we've actually met almost in person, at least from the neck up or shoulders up. So, but one thing caught my attention, and I'd like for you to talk to it a bit.
Sure.
Is the gap. So right away, getting in there, I was paying attention anyways, but if I was drifting, I would have popped right back up. When you mentioned in the mistakes that every leader makes, but you talked about the gap, that was unique, at least in everything that I've ever read and been part of and everything like that, the way you called it out. Could you talk to everybody about what the gap is and why it's so important?
When we talk about the gap, typically we're talking about not the gap between where you are and where you would like to be. We talk about the gap between where you are and where you think you are. And, I know you have a lot of sales professionals in your audience, and probably the most measurable occupation on the planet, right? You can't argue with what your sales are. I mean, they are what they are. The numbers don't lie. But what most salespeople will disagree with is why. And so even if you can measure empirically where somebody is, the presumption too often for us as leaders is that there's agreement on the starting point of the journey, right? Where we are starting from. And I have found that almost invariably is not true. That even if you can measure exactly where you're starting from, people disagree with why they are where they are, which means the solution that we concoct in our mind doesn't fit the scenario that they're playing in their mind. So the gap that we refer to is not the gap between where you are and where you want to be. It's the gap between where you are and where you actually think you are. I mean, nobody would go on a journey and not figure out where they're starting from. Nobody would go on a journey and not have agreement about where they want to get to. And yet in leadership, I find all the time that leaders go on a journey. There's not agreement about where they're starting from, and there's not passionate agreement about where they're getting to. There may be agreement, yeah, that's what we're going to do, but they're not. The people you're coaching, you're developing, you're working with, they're not passionate about it. They're just going along for the ride. And then we wonder why people aren't engaged and why people aren't bringing their whole self to work. So, I would just challenge your listeners to just slow down. And if you want to know if somebody knows where they're starting from, you have to be really good at asking questions. Telling people where they're starting from doesn't help. Years ago, we were doing a large project with Progressive Insurance, and Progressive measures more stuff than NASA. I mean, they measure everything. And we were doing this project, and we were training the supervisors to coach their direct reports, the frontline people. And the managers were also in the program. The manager said, well, we can pull that data for the supervisors so it'll be harder for them to pull it. And I'm like, under no circumstances can you pull their data. Because two things happen when you pull somebody else's data. Number one, it's no longer their data. Now it's your data that you're presenting to them. And number two, they don't have a chance to review the data and think about it and understand what's happening. You're presenting it to them. So, if they have the chance to pull it, they can look at it and they can start asking themselves questions about, like, well, I wonder why this is the way it is and what do we need to do differently. They're already trying to formulate a solution in their mind. You're not having to formulate one for them that does not fit the pattern that they've already represented.
That's great. Hey, before I switch it over back to Brianna, because I know she's got a bunch of questions, following up on this, could you share a quick example, either a real example or it could be made up to point out what it looks like when people are not being honest with themselves relative to the gap, and what it looks like after they filled the gap? What it looks like today and what it'll look like when they get it, or whichever way you want to do it.
Yeah, well, I will give you a really simple example that just happened the other day. I was coaching this relatively high level leader, and we were. Now, this is not the first time I'd coached him. This was probably our fourth session, so don't think too negatively of me. But we got about 4 minutes into the coaching session, and I said to him, "You like to interrupt people a lot, don't you?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, you've interrupted me 6 times in the past 4 minutes." And he said, "I have?" I said, "Yeah." And I said, "Look, I consider myself I really have to keep my interrupting capability at bay. My wife tells me I interrupt all the time." I said, but I've been offended by you. And that's hard to do. Please, if you're listening to this particular gentleman is one of the few individuals you can say almost anything you want to, and he will not be offended by it. That, although people tell you that's true about the way they take feedback, that is actually not true of most people. But this guy was. He actually likes it straight, very straight and very, very direct. So we had a conversation about that. Now, he didn't even realize he was doing it. So he had this gap. He thought that he was a good listener because he was shortening the conversation and allowing people to get to the destination faster by finishing their sentences, essentially.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
Yeah, I know. Well, but the truth of the matter is it was just plain rude, right? So until you recognize the gap, and the great thing about having a coach, and I know you guys do coaching, the great thing about a coach is coaches are blind spot identifiers. So the people who point at the blind spot, hey, say, do you know you do this? And since they're usually paying you to help them, they'll usually take your feedback more positively than maybe somebody else.
So some of the things, so what you're talking about, the gap and how the gap can look different to other people. And Phil,
Sure.
you were saying, like, what does it look like from where you start to where you end? We were actually having a conversation, and one of the things, you've actually written a book called The Four Faces of Frustration: How to Turn Frustration into Delight.
Right.
And it's really focused on, at least from what I gather, is explaining why companies and leaders struggle to create customer loyalty and employee engagement, and how they can take actionable steps. And that really fits within the Been There, Sold That podcast, and what Phil's talked about, what I've talked about, in really helping your clients to show up for their customers, as well as helping their employees show up for their customers and be engaged and be excited about the entire process. Yeah. So talk to me. Why did you decide to write The Four Faces of Frustration and you wrote it as a fable? So this is a little bit different than a traditional business book.
And you can't really see all the books behind me, but I have like hundreds.
Did you write them all?
Not all, no. Most of them. One maybe. But the challenge with most business books is they're just boring. And you get lost partway through. And I can't tell you how many times I talked to people and I said, did you read that book? They're like, oh, I read about the first 50 pages. I think I got the gist of what the author was saying, So I wanted to write a book people would finish. And if you think about all the great leaders all through time have taught through story, right? And stories bring us in. And now the story has to be well written, and it has to have a purpose. And so the purpose of this particular story is about a guy who takes over at the helm of a company, and he's got 4 direct reports, and he makes some immediate judgments, which we all do when we meet people, about who's motivated, who's not motivated, who's on board, who's a team player. And he finds out through the course of understanding himself better and understanding them better that he was completely erroneous in his assumptions. So what the 4 Faces of Frustration is based on is that we all experience frustration on a daily basis. I mean, if you've called a customer service group recently, I had the pleasure of dealing with one with a company who shall remain nameless, but it begins with a V Verizon recently. Did I say that out loud? And it was nobody at that company was trying to frustrate me. Nobody at that company was trying to. But I was so frustrated after 2 weeks of trying to get the same problem resolved. Each person I dealt with was
weeks.
Yes.
2 weeks. It took you 2 weeks to solve a problem.
Yeah, it did.
You were saying, I'm sorry, I totally rudely interrupted you. So you were saying, so every person that you spoke to
was very kind, very nice. I mean, they were doing their job and they weren't trying to frustrate me. But we don't serve people the way they want to be served. We serve people the way we want to be served. We don't sell the way other people want to be sold to. We sell the way we'd want to be sold to. We don't lead the way that, other people want to be led quite often. We lead the way we would want to be led. And because we were all taught this golden rule, right, that we should treat other people the way that we want to be treated, which is awesome in morality and ethics. It's horrible in leadership, sales, customer service, because people are not like you. They're different. And so the way this shows up is when we start to serve, lead, sell in a way that doesn't match someone's buying style, customer service style, leadership style, we frustrate them. Mm-hmm. And when we frustrate them, they react in one of four very specific ways. And if we just pay attention to the way people tend to react and not presume that because they're not reacting the way we would when we're frustrated, that all is well, because that's what we tend to do. I've seen this in sales situations and leadership situations. Years ago, I walked into a flooring store. My wife was already in there, and I could tell the salesperson had already made her so bad. And she just wanted to leave. And the way he was selling would have been perfectly fine with me. It wouldn't have bothered me one iota because we had very similar styles. But I could see. Now, he couldn't read the signs. He couldn't see. Now, granted, she was my wife, but it had been for some time, but it still is, by the way. You didn't have to be a rocket scientist. You just had to have your antennas up and looking out. But too often when we get interacting with people, our antennas aren't up and looking out. They're folded back in on ourselves. We're thinking about how I'm feeling and what I'm trying to say and what am I going to say next, rather than paying attention to the person that I'm talking to.
Right. And Andrew, so that's great. You know, Brianna knows my body language. She could tell I'm ready to jump up here.
He's ready.
So, you know, when you said 2 weeks for that company that started with something. Anyway, you said 2 weeks. Sometimes it's about perspective, right? And could you talk, and I'll give you where I'm going with this, but could you talk to, when you're doing your leadership training, that people need to be conscious of the perspective of who they're dealing with, not their perspective. So if you would have said to those people you're dealing with, you say, you know, this has taken 2 weeks. And they would say, isn't that amazing? It usually takes a month for everybody else. So they are thinking that 2 weeks was like, bonus time. You know, I'm going to get written up in the monthly newsletter here for our company. And you're thinking I'm changing to a company with less letters that doesn't start at the end of the alphabet. So, you know, could you talk to that a little bit about being aware of perspective? Is that something that you deal with in your coaching and trainings and courses and all that stuff?
Yeah, well, we're all mired in our own perspective, right? We all see the world through, you know, our glasses, and we think that everybody sees the world the way that we do. In fact, one of my favorite questions to ask, you know, I don't work with a lot of newly minted leaders, but when I do, especially if it's a large group, I'll ask them, I'll say, you know, have you ever wondered why your employees act the way they do? I mean, have you ever thought to yourself, I would never act that way. I would never, if my boss asked me to do that, I would never act that way. What's wrong with them? And I said, and they all nod their heads. And I'm like, you know what the problem is, don't you? And they think I'm going to say they're employees. I said, it's you. You think you're normal. I said, you're not normal. You're abnormal. That's why you're in leadership. You're abnormal. Now, I'm not saying that the behaviors you're getting from your people are desirable or okay, or, you know, you shouldn't shift them. What I am suggesting is to start with the fact that you're normal and they're abnormal will shift the entire way you interact with them. So you have to understand normative is a statistical reference point, which means it's more likely to happen than not. And you're abnormal by definition. That's why you were promoted. So let's get rid of this idea that there's something wrong with your people. That perspective, as you said, will cause you to interact with them in a way that will push them more to a defensive posture. And the opposite of defensive is learning. And you cannot do both of those at the same time. So if I push someone, and by the way, most defensive reactions are quite often caused, not always, but quite often. So if I push someone to a defensive posture, all learning ceases, which means that even if they change their behavior, it's short term. And they'll go back, and you have Groundhog Day where you're having the same coaching over and over and over again. So a lot of our work with leaders, in fact, a third of our entire process is designed to get leaders to realize that they are at least half the problem, and probably more as a general rule.
Have you found that this has been an even bigger focus now that we have multiple generations in the workforce, because I cannot tell you how many times I hear from business owners that, oh my gosh, those millennials or those, right? You just keep going down the line.
Yeah.
They're just so different. I don't know how to motivate them. They don't want to work. They only want to work in this way. And it's like, whoa. Take a step back. Have you talked to them about what motivates them?
Yeah.
What gets them excited? What type of work environment would they like? What type of work environment have they never worked in? Some of these kids are coming out of COVID. They graduated in high school. They went right into college, or COVID happened during college, and that face-to-face, that structure really wasn't there. If it was on their terms because they were working and going to school remotely. So even though we feel like COVID was so far behind us, it really wasn't.
Yeah.
And a lot of these kids have grown up who are coming out into the workforce now. They've kind of grown up in this weird space that we all kind of ended up in. So how has that changed how you teach leaders, or has it changed how you teach leaders, or is that just another reinforcement of this is why it is so important?
Yeah, I think it's changed the environment in which we operate without question. You did a really good job of explaining how different it is. I don't think leadership has changed. Leadership is based on principles. Principles are forever, right? But the urgency with which good leadership behaviors are required today is different. I like to say COVID microwaved about 10 years of change into about 3 months. And so, you just have all these people out there, and my favorite saying is young people today, whatever follows is not good. I'm pretty sure.
And vice versa, those boomers.
Yeah, those boomers.
Hey.
Going back to the perspective you were just talking about, right?
Yeah.
But, look, young people today are more, if I start with the presupposition that young people today are not motivated, guess what? That's what I'm going to find. You find whatever you look for, right? Young people today are more motivated by a mission and a purpose than they are a paycheck, which scrambles the brain of most people my age. They're like, what do you mean? Like, you'd rather have a day off than a raise? Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Like, don't you want to get ahead? And they're like, why? Why do I want to get ahead? Like, look at you. I don't want your job. You look like you're not having that much fun. So the challenge for us as leaders is not to cause someone to feel like they're wrong. Their behavior may be incorrect. They may not be behaving the way we want to, but to say that a whole generation of people is not motivated, I know that's not true, because I experienced tons of young people who are incredibly motivated. But to your point, you have to sort of have the conversation with them a very specific way. Now, if you ask them what motivates you, the problem with that question is you have to be relatively self-aware to know the answer to that question. Most leaders don't even know what motivates them. They're if you ask, well, family, money, well, those are both, they can mean so many different things, right? So the first thing is we have to be able to ask better questions in order to uncover people's motivation. Because if you ask really surface level questions, you get surface level answers, right? So you have to be able to have that conversation. In order to have that conversation, you must have trust. Because if you don't have trust, they're not even going to answer. They're not even going to bother trying to have the conversation with you. So the complexity of this has definitely ramped up since COVID. And it's not just young people. It's cascading up through the generations, because all the generations are asking the same questions now. Why are we increasing the goal again? Like, didn't we just hit a goal and now we're kind of have another goal? As leaders, the answer to that question quite often is, well, yeah, we got a new goal because it's a new year. And like, well, when are we done? Well, we're never done. Isn't that awesome? And the employees are like, no, that's not awesome. That doesn't. So no matter how hard I work, I'm never finished. Well, you have to have a reason that's bigger than the goals you're setting. And the reason that you're setting those, the big reason you have must resonate with the people. It can't just be like, we're going to be I worked with a customer service group once, and their whole thing was, we're going to give the best customer service to our customers.
What does that mean?
Yeah.
Well, they were paying their people $7 an hour. They're like, yeah, how does that help me?
Yeah.
I don't. Well, you don't get fired. Oh, great. Right.
So
You gotta have a better ideal you're striving for than that.
I have to tell you, this is not about me, but for everyone out there who's been listening, and how many times have I talked about and written about, it's all about the questions. And it's always about the questions. And how are you asking questions? You may never even have to talk about what you do if you're asking the right questions. So this is not me saying this. Andrew and I and Brianna, we did not rehearse before coming on today. So Dad may not be the smartest guy, but when you hear it from Uncle Andrew, then you can believe it. So he's got it there. So I'm really happy to hear you saying that. And Andrew, kind of in the middle, I don't want to wait to the end for this, but could you share with everybody, when you meet somebody, that's in a business environment of any kind, and how do you present yourself? What do you share with people to say that will make them want to talk to you about potentially having you help them in their business?
Well, I just had a meeting with a company last week that, I had an introduction through a third party that they respect a lot, and I've known for years. And I actually, don't know if they should work with me. I just start with the assumption that I want to learn about what it is they do, and what are their frustrations? What are the things that they are challenged by? And if you start with a servant's heart and you're trying to understand, and sometimes I'm like, I'm not going to be able to help these people. I can't. What they're dealing with isn't not in my wheelhouse, right? So what I usually try to start with is by building enough rapport where I can ask some questions that don't cause them to have to pull back the covers totally, for sure, but where I get to understand a little bit about what's happening in their business. And then I usually try to share with them some anecdotal stories about things that I've seen to see if that actually resonates with them. And if it does, then, we're probably well on the way to starting a relationship.
And what does that person or that business that you can help look like in general?
There's lots.
I know, that's why I said in general. I caught myself here at the end.
But it's, businesses, there's three things, right? Three problems every business has: people, process, and product. And the stickiest of the three is always people, right? So we work in the people realm. We don't work in the process realm. We're not Black Belt, Six Sigma. We're not product specialists. We're not marketing specialists. But if they've got people challenges, typically, and they want to build leadership within their organization, the one thing I've never heard, Phil, within an organization is, what we have too many of? Leaders. We have too many leaders in our group. If we had fewer leaders, we'd be fine, but we got way too many. No, that never happens. Leaders, if you can, refine your leadership skill. And, somebody said to me one time, it's what you learn after you think you know everything that makes you an expert. So leadership is such a deep subject. I mean, I've had frontline leaders go through our leadership development process and say, I didn't get that much out of it. And then I've got a guy who runs a $2 billion company that said it was the best program he'd ever been through. So the program's the same. So, what was the difference? Well, one person was looking for what they needed to learn, and the other person was looking for validation that there was no gap between where they were and where they thought they were, that it was not them. It was an external issue. So the company we can't help, the individuals we can't help, if they're externally focused. The problems you want to solve are always out there, but the piece that you can do something about is always right here.
I've got more questions.
Go right ahead. I
love that explanation, because I feel like you hit the nail on the head. When I'm working with business owners, the conversation always goes to that person. Well, that person didn't, or they aren't performing, or they aren't doing what they need to do. It's like, wait a second, did you set the expectations? Did you have conversations? Right. Did you put deadlines on the conversations? Did you create guardrails for them so they know how to operate and what to do within those guardrails? No, I just gave them autonomy to do whatever. Well, they want to please you. That's all they want to do is please you. So you have to actually set up a framework for them to be able to do that. So, and that I feel like I would say as a smaller business owner is harder than potentially somebody who's an executive or a leader, because you know, it's top down. You're following orders, so to speak, from what leadership is telling you, and you're just disseminating that information. So one of the things, and I'm going to shift back to the book here. So you had mentioned, well, with this book, it's the 4 faces of frustration. You never said what the faces are. I'm so curious as to the faces, because the thing that pops into my head, and Phil and I know about NLP, so neuro-linguistic programming. And when you were speaking to that, I'm like, oh, they're not speaking the same language.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So it's being able to pick up on what that language is so you can communicate better to them, so you can be speaking in their words. So, oh, cool. I hit the nail on the head.
Yeah, for sure. It's like you are. It's like you're in a foreign country and you don't speak the language, so you speak the foreign language or speak English with the foreign language accent. It doesn't make you any more understandable to the cab driver if you speak English with a French accent. You know.
Man, that's the old Steve Martin thing.
That's right.
Hey, take me to Le Hotel.
That's right. It doesn't help. So when we talk about the 4 faces of frustration, just I'll run through them really quickly, and if as you do this, we'll see if you guys can pick up what maybe each of you are. Don't try to figure out yourself. Try to figure out your partner. Everybody gets angry from time to time. Right. So I'm not talking about frustration like, oh my gosh, I can't believe it's raining again. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a deep-seated frustration like, you know, I can't believe this is happening again. And everybody gets angry when stuff happens. I mean, occasionally I've been known to. But 3 of the 4 faces transition through anger into frustration. One of them stays looking angry. So if you've ever met anybody who's just a super hard driver, never fast enough, they want everything yesterday. It's just like bam, 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 bam. And it's not that they don't like people, but by gosh, they're annoying sometimes. And they just want to talk. And can we talk later, please? That's what we call a red. Hard driver, take the hill. If it's the wrong hill, we'll find out what hill we're going to go. We may hurt some people in the process, but by gosh, that's just the cost to getting to the top of the hill. You know, that's a red. Most people know some reds. You know, a lot of times leaders are reds because they think they make great leaders. They may or may not. That's a skill issue, by the way, but they like being in charge. So those are reds. The opposite end of that is greens. And when greens are, after they get through the anger initially and they get through it much faster, they go to a simmering frustration where all emotion goes away. So the face for the green is like no emotion, which confuses the heck out of the other 3 communication styles, because they're like, you're not talking. Why aren't you talking? If there was a problem, why didn't you tell me there was a problem? They're like, well, I tried, but you wouldn't listen. So I just stopped talking, because what's the point? I'll just clean up the mess later when it all blows up. You know, that's the green, you know. Now, if I'm a red and I'm expecting people to come at me when there's a problem, and someone just stops talking, I'm thinking they're good. They're ready to go. We're charge the hill. Problem solved. And the greens will go along, you know, because they don't want to make waves and stuff. Greens are the biggest group in society, by the way. And the longer somebody's been in a job, the more likely it is that they are a green. They're incredibly loyal. They're not really big on change. They like to do the same thing. They enjoy that. They enjoy the stability of that. So those are diametrically opposed. Now, similarly to the red, there's a yellow, and yellows like to move fast too. But when they get frustrated, they might blow up initially, but then they feel bad that they blew up, and they start trying to tell you, oh, it's going to be fine. Don't worry about it. They'll put the lipstick on the pig. They'll try to convince you everything's good and it's all going to work out. And gosh, aren't we glad we're here together? You know what's good about this? It's awesome. So they become the eternal optimist, and they just start spinning. That's the yellow. And then the opposite to the yellow is what we refer to as the blue. And the blue has the worried face because they just start asking questions. because they can see the potholes, they can see the axles about to come off the car. They're like, no one's paying attention. I got to start. Can you see this? Can you see this problem? Can you see this problem? Can you see this problem? And so when they're frustrated, they want to slow everything down, but they don't get quiet. They get strategic in asking the questions that piss the other three styles off, actually. Because they're pointing out all the problems with whatever is actually happening. So those are the four styles. Reds are easy to identify as a general rule, the angry face, Yellows are pretty easy to identify because they're the happy-go-lucky, never met a stranger, I'm just going to ignore the problem and it'll probably go away people. Greens, no emotion, and blues, lots of questions when they're frustrated.
Is there a direct correlation to the frustration, the types of frustration, people you're describing, and decision making? As if you were to describe decision makers, like from the result of a DISC type study, or from observations, would you be able to match those to that, or do they cross?
Oh, they totally do. Totally do. It's the four phases of frustration is built on the DISC model, but what we were finding was that it was easiest to understand someone's communication style when they were frustrated. So that's like, and by the way, it's the most critical time to understand their communication style, because that's when the relationship is most at risk.
So looking at it from both directions, from the decision maker's perspective and the victim of the decision maker, or the person who's frustrated. Did I say that? Yeah. So what needs to be, once it's recognized by one or both sides, what's the next step?
Yeah.
To make things better, to make communications work, right? That's what we're talking about here. If I get what you and Brianna are.
Yeah, so here's the great thing about this system is you don't need a secret decoder ring and you don't need like a manual. So I'm going to give you an example. I have a lot of red and yellow in my communication style. I'm very, very fast moving. The lowest style for me is blue, which is the detail orientation, which is why I was never going to make a great engineer, because I get bored with detail. So, I know, like who knew? So anyway, but in any case, so I will struggle with people when I first meet them, or if we're in a sort of frustrating, stressful situation, they're trying to clamp it down, make it go slow and get all the details. And I'm just like, that just drives me crazy. So if I wasn't very self-aware about that, I could be like, what's wrong with them? Right? So here's the beautiful thing, though. I have really good friends who are blues, very detail oriented. I have a good relationship with them. So if I went to them and I said, hey, Mike, I'm having trouble with Sally. And he's like, I know, I've been watching. And I'm like, Mike, what's going on? He, without consulting a manual, will say, Oxley, it's you. Here's what you need to do differently to improve your relationship with Sally. Now, if I'm not careful, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, me? It's not me. Sally's the problem. And I'm going to go find Tom, who sees the world the way I do. And I'm going to say, I'm having a problem with Sally. And he's like, I am too. And we're good people, so it must be Sally. So it's much more comfortable for me to talk to the person who sees the world the way I do. But the person who can help me is Mike, who sees the world differently. When I go talk to Tom, I'm seeking what we call the cold comfort of validation. He's validating me, but there's no growth in validation. There's only growth when someone helps you see something that you don't see yourself. And the good thing is, Mike's not going to tell me to go do handstands and do stuff that's going to take very long. He's going to tell me to do some pretty simple things that I could do. It's not even that hard. People say it takes too long to change. It doesn't. It's just small changes in critical times, especially when someone's frustrated.
So, Brianna, we are moving towards the healthy lifetime of a successful podcast here. So, what's the big question that you have burning, and we'll turn it over to Andrew after that for a whole bunch of stuff.
But where can people find you, where they can connect with you and see all the things that you're doing and see what other books that you have? Because if I'm not mistaken, you've got like a nice long list.
So my wife says I have an incredible capacity to give long answers to short questions. So I apologize to all your listeners for my long answers, but I'm skilled at it. But I guess here's the thing I would say. If you go to our website, transformingresults.com, transforming results, because that's what we're all about. We're about transforming results. We're not about just like sort of playing in the margins. Transformingresults.com. We have blog articles there. We actually have a live workshop we do once a month. We give away for free. If you register for the workshop, we will actually send you a free copy of the book. That's because we believe that by giving, people will, if they're sort of a good fit for what we do, they're going to see great value in it. And if they see great value in it, then they might want to know more. And if they don't, by gosh, I hope they use the book to improve the quality of their relationships, both personal and professional. So that's probably the best place to reach out and connect with them.
Okay, good. And I did notice that when you're on the website, it pops up numerous times. So if anybody's curious, is like, well, where's this workshop that I want to see? It will come up.
Yep.
Don't worry. Just make sure your pop-ups are enabled, because that'll come up and it'll.
And the one thing, for everybody out there, the reason you're actually listening to this podcast and you've made it here this far along anyways, is because you are definitely looking to improve and you want to improve. Because if you don't want to change, as Andrew was talking about, making the small things become large successes, if you wouldn't be here. Because just as Andrew's been saying all the way, people watch the news for things where they agree with what the commentary is, or the pundit shows, or whatever you want to call it. You don't see people going, let's go see what they're doing over here. No, we all go where we want to be. And you are here because you want to learn, and we try to bring you the best and most up-to-date information, get your feedback, and bring in guests like Andrew. It's great. So take advantage of Andrew's offer here. See what he's got and everything else. And by the way, I bet you, Andrew, that if somebody was where you couldn't help them, you could probably direct them where they could find an answer or a solution to what's been bugging them, right?
I did it today. I had a client that wanted something done, and I connected them with another coach that was specialized in conflict mediation, and had that conversation today.
Oh,
that's awesome. I love that. And we are going to have all of your links located within the podcast notes. So if you're like, wait, what was that again? You can go back to the podcast notes and you can see all the places where you can visit and listen to Andrew. So thank you so much for your time today. We truly appreciate it. And I keep hearing that Canadian accent.
Hey.
Yeah.
I'm like, he's in Georgia. He hasn't picked up the Southern accent yet, but he's still holding on to the Canadian accent a little bit.
My Canadian brethren made fun of me when I first went back up north after moving down south and said I had a Southern accent. Then my wife arrived, who truly does have a Southern accent, and they don't bug me anymore.
No, I'm sure they would. I do have a quick question before we leave. So what is your wife in the blue, yellow, red, green?
By the way, you're never really one color, right? Some people are. But most people are at least two, sometimes three. She is actually a green, blue, yellow. So I'm 100 red, 100 yellow. So I am her nemesis at times. We often are attracted in relationships to people who are very, very different than us, which makes it super exciting at first. And then if we stop valuing that difference, it just becomes annoying. And the very thing that attracted us to the person becomes the thing that drives us apart. But we can always value the difference. If you don't, knowing you're different and being aware of it is not the same as valuing it. When you value the difference, you lean into it, and you don't. By the way, that doesn't mean you don't have bad behaviors that need to shift. Like, you can't use this system as an excuse for bad behavior. Let me just say that. You can't say, well, I'm a red. What do you expect from me? Or I'm a yellow. I'm a blue. There are bad behaviors attached to each of the styles. And what we need to recognize is that just because I'm a yellow doesn't mean I get to just be frivolous and ignore details and not be sensitive to people's feelings. I don't get to do that.
Because that's just how I am.
Yeah,
right?
that's a mystery.
See, that doesn't count, Phil. You can't just say that. You don't get a pass.
Yeah. So I don't think we could find a better way to end than the way with what you just described. That was fantastic. And we want to thank everybody. Brianna and I would like to thank everybody for continuing to follow the Been There, Sold That podcast and join us and communicate with us. And if you want to learn more about what's going on, you need to get a hold of Andrew. You can't find him again. You could always go to BeenThereSoldThat.com, send us a message, let us know what's going on.
Yeah.
And
until next time,
good selling.
Take care, everyone.
Bye.